The molten glow of Draleth Prime's twin suns bled through the reinforced viewports of the orbital fortress, casting the command deck in a hellish orange-red hue. Commander Draleth stood motionless, his segmented armor plates reflecting the forge light of his homeworld, his clawed hands clasped behind his back. Below him, the planet's surface churned with industry. Great foundries belching fire, molten rivers carving through fortress cities, the ceaseless pulse of war machines being forged in the depths. It was the last quiet day. The Dralethians had known war for millennia. Their civilization was built on it, their philosophy shaped by it. Strength was measured in firepower, honor in conquest. And yet, as Draleth watched the tactical displays flicker with incoming reports, something unfamiliar coiled in his gut. The humans had arrived 3 cycles ago, not as conquerors, not as supplicants, but as allies. A laughable notion. The galactic consensus had long dismissed them as reckless, emotional creatures, their history a litany of petty conflicts and self-inflicted wounds. Their technology was crude, their tactics undisciplined. And yet, Draleth's secondary eyelids flicked shut for a moment, recalling the first time he had seen a human warship, not the blocky utilitarian vessels of the consensus fleets, but something different, angular, asymmetrical, its hull layered with overlapping armor plates, like the scales of some ancient predator. It moved wrong, too fast, too fluid, as if physics were merely a suggestion. And then there was her. Major Maya Wood stood at the far end of the command deck, her posture relaxed in a way no Dralethian warrior would ever allow. She wore no ceremonial armor, only a simple black uniform, the insignia of Earth's combined defense forces stark against her shoulder. Her dark eyes scanned the same data streams as Draleth, but where his officers saw numbers, she saw patterns. Vashdor, the chief scientist, had dismissed her at first. Primitive, he had called her. A species still bound to chemical propulsion and fission weapons. And then the humans had demonstrated their real technology. Draleth's mandibles twitched at the memory. The consensus had expected railguns, plasma lances, predictable weapons. Instead, the humans had unveiled something far worse. Adaptive munitions, warheads that learned, shields that evolved, and the soldiers. Sergeant Richard Felger had been the first human to set foot on Dralethian soil. A hulking figure even by Dralethian standards, his cybernetic augmentations humming with barely restrained power. He had not bowed. He had not flinched. He had simply looked at Draleth and smiled, as if they were old comrades. Now, as the first reports of the enemy fleet's approach scrolled across the screens, Draleth found himself glancing at the humans, not with suspicion, not with disdain, with something dangerously close to hope. The last quiet day was ending, and the galaxy would soon learn why the Dralethians, masters of war, architects of annihilation, had chosen to stand beside humanity. Not because they were weak, but because they were terrifying. The Dralethian command hub thrummed with the deep, resonant pulse of industrial-grade reactors, their molten cores bleeding orange, red light through reinforced viewports. The air smelled of scorched metal and ionized plasma, a scent Draleth had known since his first deployment. It was the smell of war, and yet something was different. The humans moved among his warriors like shadows given form, their movements precise, their silence unnerving. Major Maya Wood stood at the central holotank, her fingers flicking through tactical projections with a speed that made even Dralethian neural interfaces seem sluggish. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Draleth watched as she adjusted the fleet's formation with a series of sharp gestures, her augmented reality display painting the void in grids of blue and gold. The human ships, blocky, brutal things, armored like siege engines, shifted in response, their thrusters flaring white against the black. Adaptive formations. The thought slithered through Draleth's mind like a blade between ribs. The Dralethian consensus had always waged war with rigid doctrine, their fleets moving in precise, geometric patterns perfected over centuries. But the humans, they fought like a living organism. No two ships held the same position for more than a few seconds. No attack vector remained uncontested for long. And then there were the shields. Vashdor, the lead Dralethian scientist, had spent the last 3 cycles analyzing them. His claws tapped against the console, hissing in frustration as another scan returned inconclusive. "Impossible," he muttered, his voice a low growl of molten gravel. "Their barrier technology, it changes." Draleth stepped closer, his armored boots clanking against the deck. "Explain." Vashdor gestured to the holographic readout, where the human flagship's defensive matrix pulsed in erratic, shifting patterns. Standard energy shields dissipate force evenly, predictable, but these, he jabbed a claw at the display, they reinforce where we strike, like muscle memory, like instinct. A cold knot tightened in Draleth's gut. He had seen human soldiers fight before. He had watched their reflexes, their adaptability, but this was something else. This was war learned, war remembered, and then the alarms blared. The enemy fleet had arrived. Draleth turned to the main screen, where the void split open in a cascade of warp signatures, dozens of them, then hundreds. The enemy had come in force. And yet, as the first volleys of plasma lances streaked toward the human Dralethian line, something happened. The human shields rippled, not in resistance, in recognition, and then they struck back. Draleth had seen countermeasures before. He had seen point, defense grids, shield harmonics, even sacrificial armor. But this was something new. The human barriers didn't just absorb the attack. They analyzed it, and then, with terrifying precision, they replicated it. A pulse of energy lanced outward from the human flagship, a perfect mirror of the enemy's own weaponry, only stronger, faster, hungrier. The first enemy cruiser died screaming, its hull peeled open like molten fruit. Draleth exhaled slowly, his claws flexing. The galaxy had thought humanity weak. It had been wrong, and now, as the void burned with the first fires of battle, Draleth understood at last why his people had chosen to stand beside them. Not out of pity, but because when the end came, there was no one else you would rather have at your side. No one else who fought like this. The battle had ended hours ago, but the void still shimmered with the echoes of destruction. Draleth stood in the observation blister of his command vessel, the molten edge, his claws pressed against the reinforced glass. Outside, the wreckage of the enemy fleet drifted in slow, broken arcs, twisted metal, and gutted hulls, their once proud forms reduced to cosmic debris. The human flagship, Iron Resolve, floated among them like a predator, surveying its kill, its dark armor scored but unbroken, its weapons humming with residual heat. He had seen war before. The Dralethian people were no strangers to conflict. Their history was written in molten steel and scorched battlefields. But this was different. The humans had not just fought. They had learned. A soft chime from the door interrupted his thoughts. Vashdor entered, his copper-plated cranial ridges flickering with the dim orange glow of the ship's interior lighting. The scientist moved with the careful precision of one still processing shock, his data slate clutched in clawed hands like a relic of some forgotten faith. "You saw the scans," Draleth said, not turning. Vashdor exhaled through his nasal vents, a sound like steam escaping a pressure valve. "I did." Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken implications. The humans had not simply repelled the attack, they had consumed it. Their adaptive shielding had dissected the enemy's weaponry mid-strike, engineered its harmonics, and fired it back with brutal efficiency. It was not just a defense, it was an act of dominance, a declaration that humanity would not merely endure, but evolve in the face of annihilation. Vashdor's claws tapped against his slate. Their technology, it does not follow known principles. It adapts, like a living thing. Draleth flexed his own claws, remembering the way the human barriers had rippled before striking back. They do not just build machines, Vashdor. They build answers. A transmission alert pulsed on the command console. The humans were requesting a debrief. Draleth turned from the viewport, his scales still humming with the residual energy of battle. Bring Major Woods and her team to the war room. I want to know exactly what we are dealing with. The war room was a cavernous space, its walls lined with the angular, segmented architecture of Dralethian design. Heavy industrial plating, molten conduits, pulsing with orange, red energy. The air smelled of heated metal and ozone, the scent of a forge still cooling from its labor. Major Maya Woods stood at the center of the holotable, her posture relaxed, but her eyes sharp. Behind her, Sergeant Felger leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable beneath the scar that traced his jawline. Draleth studied them. The humans were smaller than his kind, their frames lacking the natural armor and bulk of Dralethian physiology. And yet, there was something in the way they carried themselves. A quiet certainty, as if the weight of the void meant nothing to them. You adapted, Draleth said, his voice a low rumble. Mid-battle. Woods nodded. We did. No elaboration, no boasting, just fact. Vashdor stepped forward, his data, slate projecting a flickering hologram of the battle's final moments, the human shields flaring, the retaliatory strike lancing outward. This should not be possible. Energy absorption, yes, but replication? In seconds. Felger smirked. You'd be surprised what we can do when we're pissed off. Wood shot him a look, but there was no real reprimand in it. Draleth exhaled slowly, his mind racing. The galaxy had dismissed humanity as reckless, emotional, too volatile to be a true threat. But that was the mistake. They were not reckless, they were relentless. And now, as the wreckage of their enemies burned in the void behind them, Draleth understood the truth. The humans did not fight to survive. They fought to win. Section Fe. The call to arms. The war room of the Dralethian flagship Molten Resolve hummed with the deep rhythmic pulse of its core reactors, the orange-red glow of plasma conduits casting long shadows across the angular fortress, like walls. Draleth stood motionless before the tactical display, his armored fingers tracing the holographic wreckage of the battle. Human and enemy alike, scattered across the void. Vashdor's earlier disbelief still lingered in the air like the acrid tang of molten metal. The scientist had spent hours dissecting the human counterattack, running simulations, cross-referencing every known energy dispersion model in the galactic archives. None of them explained what he had witnessed. None of them could. Humans did not follow the rules. They rewrote them. Draleth's secondary eyelids flicked shut for a moment, shielding his vision from the glare of the display. His mind replayed the battle in perfect, brutal clarity. The way the human warship Ironclad had shuddered under the first barrage, its shields flaring white-hot before collapsing. The way its crew had not panicked, not even hesitated. They had smiled. The impossible. A surge of stolen energy, repurposed, reforged into a weapon the Dralethians had never seen. A lance of pure retaliatory annihilation, screaming back along the enemy's own firing vector. Vashdor had called it madness. Draleth called it genius. A soft chime broke his reverie. The doors hissed open, revealing Major Woods and Sergeant Felger, their human frames silhouetted against the corridor's dim lighting. Woods stepped forward, her boots clicking against the segmented metal floor. She carried no weapon, wore no armor, just the simple black uniform of her rank. Yet Draleth felt the weight of her presence like a warship entering orbit. You called for us, Woods said. Not a question, a statement. Draleth inclined his head. The enemy fleet is regrouping. They will strike again. Felger crossed his arms. And the bluntness should have been offensive. Coming from a human, it was almost refreshing. Draleth activated the holodisplay, the star map expanding to show the system's defensive grid, Dralethian fortresses, orbital platforms, the last bastions of their homeworld's protection. All of it outmatched. "We cannot hold," Draleth admitted, the words like gravel in his throat. "Not alone." Wood studied the map, her gaze sharp, calculating. "You want our help." A pause. Then, the admission cost him. The Dralethian Empire had never asked for aid. Not from anyone. Certainly not from a species the galaxy had dismissed as primitive, as unworthy. But Draleth had seen the truth. Humans did not fight like soldiers. They fought like storms. Woods exchanged a glance with Felger. Something unspoken passed between them. A language of shared battles, of silent understanding. Then she turned back to Draleth. "Tell us where to hit them. No negotiations. No demands for tribute or territory. Just action." Vashdor stepped forward, his data slate trembling in his grip. "You would do this without..." Felger cut him off with a grin. "Buddy, you protected our embassy when no one else would. That's all the reason we need." Draleth felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest, a sensation his people had no word for. The holodisplay flickered as Woods leaned in, her finger tracing a path through the enemy's formation. "Here, their command ship, take that out. The rest will scatter." Draleth studied the vector. "Their shields are impenetrable," Woods smirked. "Not to us." And in that moment, Draleth understood. The galaxy had feared the wrong thing. It wasn't human weapons that made them terrifying. It was their certainty, the unshakable belief that no wall was unbreakable, no foe unbeatable, that if they had to tear the stars apart to protect what was theirs, they would. Draleth straightened, his spines flaring in resolve. "Then we fight together." Woods nodded. The call to arms had been answered. Section Fey. Through the gate, the Dralethian command hub thrummed with the deep, resonant pulse of their war engines, a sound like molten metal being poured into the bones of the world. The air shimmered with heat distortion from the plasma conduit snaking along the walls, casting everything in an eerie orange glow. Draleth stood at the tactical hololith, his armored claws flexing unconsciously as he watched the human fleet maneuver into position. They moved wrong, not in the way of incompetence, but in defiance of every known doctrine of war. Galactic fleets moved in rigid formations, precise and predictable. Shields interlocked like scales. The human ships, angular, brutal things of blackened steel and glowing reactor veins, slipped through the void like predators stalking prey. They didn't hold formation. They adapted. Vashdor, his copper-plated cranial ridges twitching in unease, hissed through his vents. "Their vectors make no tactical sense. They're leaving entire flanks exposed." Draleth didn't answer. He was watching the lead human vessel, the Iron Resolve, as it drifted toward the enemy's forward picket line. On any other ship, it would have been suicide. But the humans had done something impossible. They had hidden their energy signatures, not masked, not dampened, erased. The Dralethian sensors, honed over centuries of war, registered nothing but empty space where the Iron Resolve should have been. Only the occasional flicker of its drive plume, brief as a dying ember, betrayed its position. How? Vashdor's voice was barely audible over the thrum of the reactors. Draleth's spines flattened against his back. He had seen human ingenuity before. But this was something else. A warship that moved like a ghost. Then, the Iron Resolve struck. One moment, the enemy picket ships orbited lazily, their shields a shimmering wall of energy. The next, the human vessel materialized among them, its railgun batteries already spitting hypersonic slugs into their unguarded flanks. Shields flared and died in the same instant, their generators torn apart before they could react. The enemy ships broke apart like brittle ore under a forge. Hammer Vashdor's claws dug into the console. They knew the shield harmonics. Of course they did, Draleth growled. Humans didn't just fight. They studied, they dissected every weakness, every flaw, and then they exploited it with terrifying precision. The hololith flickered as Major Wood's voice crackled over the comms. Gates open. Moving to Phase 2, Draleth turned his gaze to the massive quantum rift swirling at the edge of the battlefield. The enemy's primary reinforcement conduit. The humans hadn't just come to defend. They had come to end the war, and as the iron resolve plunged into the rift, its hull bleeding molten light, Draleth felt something ancient and primal stir in his chest. The quantum rift swallowed the iron resolve whole, its angular hull wreathed in molten light as it pierced the dimensional boundary. Behind it, the remnants of the Dralethian fleet hung in the void, their commanders silent, their warriors gripping weapons with claws that trembled not from fear, but from the sheer weight of what they had just witnessed. Draleth exhaled, his secondary lungs cycling the stale air of the command deck. The hololith flickered, replaying the last moments before the human warship vanished, the precision of their railgun salvos, the way their boarding drones had carved through the enemy like surgical instruments through flesh. Vashdor's voice was a whisper, his copper-plated fingers tracing the data streams. They mapped the rift harmonics in seconds. No species should be able to. They're humans, Draleth rumbled, cutting him off. He had seen this before, not in battle, not like this, but in the old war stories, the ones passed down from veterans who had fought beside them. Stories of Krixx Pass, the memory burned in his mind like a forge, flare. 5 cycles ago, when the Dralethian Empire had been on the brink of collapse, when the insectoid Krixx had poured through the outer colonies, like a tide of chitin and plasma, it had been humans who held the line. Not with overwhelming firepower, not with superior technology, with stubbornness. Krixx Pass was a bottleneck, a narrow stellar corridor where the Krixx swarm had to funnel their forces. The Dralethian High Command had deemed it indefensible. The humans, stationed there as a token embassy guard force, had disagreed. Major Maya Woods had stood on the command deck of her battered cruiser, the Vigilant, her face streaked with soot, her voice calm as she outlined the plan. We hold. That's it. We hold until the rest of your fleets regroup. Draleth, then a junior officer, had scoffed. With what? Your ship's armor is already compromised. Your weapons aren't the point, she had said, turning those unnerving, steady eyes on him. The Krixx think in swarms. They expect us to break, so we don't. And they hadn't. For 17 hours, the Vigilant and its skeletal crew had weathered the storm. They had no energy shields left by the 4th hour. By the 8th, their railguns were overheating, their decks venting atmosphere. By the 12th, they were down to kinetic slugs and improvised mines, hurling debris into the swarm's path like ancient warriors, dropping boulders on an advancing army. And still, they held. When the Krixx finally broke, it wasn't because the humans had outgunned them. It was because the swarm's commanders, creatures of cold logic, could not comprehend an enemy that refused to stop. Draleth had stood on the Vigilant's ruined bridge afterward, staring at the human crew, bloodied, exhausted, some laughing, others silently weeping. They had no right to be alive, no right to have won. The hololith flickered again, dragging Draleth back to the present. The iron resolve had emerged on the far side of the rift, its weapons already firing, its hull glowing like a star-forged blade. Vashdor's voice was hollow. They're engaging the Krixx command fleet, alone. Draleth's mandibles tightened. Of course they were. Humans didn't just fight, they endured. And when the galaxy finally understood that, it would never dare stand against them again. Section Fe. The cost the iron resolve burned through the void like a blade drawn from a forge, its hull glowing molten under the relentless fire of the Krixx command fleet. Draleth watched the hololith feed, his claws digging into the command console's edge. The human warship was outnumbered 12-1. It didn't matter. The humans had never cared about odds. Vashdor's voice crackled over the comm, his usual scientific detachment fraying into something raw. Their armor integrity is failing. They can't sustain this. Draleth didn't answer. He didn't need to. On the screen, the Iron Resolve's railguns fired again, their projectiles punching through a Krixx battleship's shields with contemptuous ease. The alien vessel detonated in a silent bloom of plasma, its segmented hull peeling apart like overripe fruit. But the Krixx didn't retreat. They never did. A fresh volley of bioplasma torpedoes streaked toward the human ship. The Iron Resolve's point, defense turrets spat fire, intercepting most, but not all. One struck home, melting through the already weakened armor near the aft section. Draleth's secondary heart clenched. He had seen human ships die before. He knew what came next. 20 cycles ago, on the edge of the Ruthless expanse, Draleth had been younger then, his carapace still unmarked by war. The Vigilant had been escorting a human diplomatic convoy when the Krixx ambushed them. The humans' escorts, 3 aging frigates, their hulls patched with salvaged plating, had turned to face the swarm without hesitation. Draleth had expected them to break. Instead, their comms had crackled with laughter. "Well, boys, a human captain had drawled. Looks like we get to die the fun way." The frigates had fought like cornered beasts, their railguns firing until the barrels warped. Their crews, jettisoning damaged armor plates to buy seconds more of life. When their reactors finally overloaded, they hadn't tried to flee. They'd rammed the Krixx flagship instead. Draleth had watched the fireball consume half the swarm, his mandibles slack. Why? He had demanded of the human liaison afterward. "You had no chance." The human had shrugged, her face still smeared with soot from the battle. "Someone had to buy time for the civvies. Might as well be us." The Iron Resolve's engines flared as it executed a brutal turn, presenting its least damaged side to the enemy. Its remaining missile pods emptied in a single, apocalyptic salvo. Vashdor's sensors screamed warnings, there venting core plasma into their weapons. There, the hololith whited out. When the feed cleared, half the Krixx fleet was gone. The rest reeled, their formations shattered. The Iron Resolve drifted, its hull blackened, its spine broken. But its guns still tracked. Draleth exhaled slowly. This was the cost. This was why the galaxy feared humanity. Not because they won, but because they made sure no one else did either. Section Fey. The enemy's hand. The silence on the Iron Resolve's bridge was absolute. Draleth's claws flexed against the command console, the dark metal groaning under the pressure. His secondary eyes flickered across the hololith, tracing the wreckage of the Krixx fleet, twisted hulls venting plasma, shattered formations drifting like embers in the void. The humans had done this, not with superior numbers, not with flawless tactics, but with something far more terrifying, the willingness to burn everything to deny the enemy victory. Vashdor's voice crackled through the comm, his usual clinical detachment fraying. "Their reactor is at Fey integrity. Hull breaches on decks 3 through 7. Life support failing." A pause. They should be dead. Draleth's mandibles twitched. He had seen human ships die before. They did not go quietly. They did not surrender, even crippled. The Iron Resolve's guns remained active, tracking the remaining Krixx vessels with predatory patience. The humans had rigged their own power conduits to feed directly into weapon systems, bypassing safeties, turning their dying ship into a final jagged blade. A flicker of movement on the hololith. The Krixx were regrouping. Draleth's spines flattened. They would not retreat. The Krixx never did. They would come again. And this time, they would drown the Iron Resolve in numbers. A transmission cut through the static Major Maya Wood's face appeared on the secondary screen. Her features streaked with soot, her uniform torn at the shoulder where a conduit had ruptured. Behind her, the bridge was a ruin, sparking consoles, bulkheads warped from heat, a crew moving with the grim efficiency of those who knew death was inevitable. Draleth. Her voice was raw. "We're holding position, but we won't last another wave." He knew what she was asking. The Dralethian fleet hovered at the edge of the engagement zone, fresh, untouched. They had watched the humans bleed themselves dry to protect a world that was not even theirs. And now the choice was his. Vashdor's claws tapped a rapid staccato against his console. High Commander, the tactical advantage is clear. The Krixx are weakened. If we strike now, Draleth silenced him with a gesture. He remembered the human soldier's words from years ago, the ones that had haunted him. Somebody had to buy time. The humans had done more than that. They had bought honor. His decision crystallized. All vessels, he growled. The command resonating through the fleet's neural link. Engage. The Dralethian ships surged forward, their angular hulls cutting through the void like blades unsheathed. Orange, red plasma flared from their weapon cores, molten trails streaking toward the Krixx. The humans had shown them how to fight. Now the Dralethians would show the Krixx what happened when you made an enemy of both. On the Iron Resolve's bridge, Maya Woods exhaled, a slow, weary sound. Then she grinned. Took you long enough. The Iron Resolve burned through the void, its engines a dull roar beneath the deck plating. The Krixx armada had broken formation, their once impenetrable lines shattered by the Dralethian assault. But the battle wasn't over. Major Maya Woods stood at the center of the bridge, her fingers curled around the edges of the tactical display. The holographic projection flickered with the shifting tide of the engagement. Dralethian warships carving through Krixx flotillas, their brutalist hulls wreathed in molten plasma. She should have felt relief. Instead, her gut twisted. Krixx didn't retreat. They adapted. A shadow passed over the display. Sergeant Richard Felger stepped beside her, his armor still streaked with coolant burns from the last boarding skirmish. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence was enough, a silent reminder that the fight wasn't just about tactics. It was about survival. Maya exhaled. They're regrouping. The words weren't a question. Felger's jaw tightened. They always do. Draleth watched the battle unfold from the command throne of the Molten Fist, his claws digging into the armrests. The Krixx were falling back, too easily. Their retreat was orderly, disciplined. Vashdor hissed beside him, his copper-plated cranial ridges flaring with agitation. They're luring us into the debris field. The radiation will scramble our targeting systems. Draleth's secondary eyelids flicked shut for a fraction of a second. He had seen this before. Years ago, on a nameless moon, a human squad had done the same feigned retreat, drawn the Krixx into a kill zone, and then erased them. Now the Krixx were using human tactics. The irony burned worse than plasma fire. Signal the fleet, he growled. Hold position. Vashdor's spines bristled. We cannot let them escape. We want. Draleth activated the neural link, his thoughts bleeding into the fleet's shared consciousness. Prepare for silent run. The Iron Resolve's engines cut to zero. No warning, no gradual power down. One moment, the ship was a roaring beast. The next, it was a ghost. Maya's breath fogged in the sudden cold as life support switched to minimal reserves. The bridge lights dimmed to a blood-red glow, casting long shadows across the crew's faces. They're doing it, Felger muttered. Maya nodded. Silent run was a human tactic. One they'd taught the Dralethians in desperation. During the first Krixx incursion, shut down everything, become invisible, let the enemy think they'd won, and then strike. On the tactical display, the Dralethian fleet vanished, one ship after another winking out like dying stars. The Krixx hesitated, their formations stuttered, their sensor sweeps frantic. They had expected a chase. They had expected prey. Instead, they found nothing. Draleth's pulse hammered in his secondary arteries. Silent run was agony for a Dralethian. Their biology thrived on heat, on the constant thrum of molten energy cores. To go dark was to suffocate, but he endured. Because the humans had. Because they had shown him that victory wasn't just about strength. It was about patience, about sacrifice. A chime echoed through the neural link. The Krixx had taken the bait. Their ships turned, their weapon ports glowing as they prepared to re-engage. Draleth bared his fangs, The molten fist roared back to life. Plasma conduits flared, flooding the ship with searing heat. Targeting arrays locked, weapons charged. Across the void, the rest of the Dralethian fleet erupted from the darkness like embers reignited. The Krixx had no time to react. The first volley tore through their lead cruiser, molten rounds punching through its hull like white-hot knives. Secondary explosions rippled through their formation as railgun slugs found reactors, as plasma lances sheared through command decks. The Krixx died screaming. Maya watched the slaughter unfold, her fingers tightening around Felger's forearm. "They learned," she whispered. Felger's grin was sharp. "Yeah, they did. The Dralethians weren't just fighting. They were fighting like humans, and the galaxy would never be the same." The Krixx fleet burned. Molten wreckage tumbled through the void, twisted metal glowing orange as it cooled in the vacuum. The Dralethian warships moved among the ruins, like predators circling a fresh kill, their plasma lances still humming with residual heat, their armor scorched but unbroken. Draleth stood on the command deck of the Molten Fist, his claws flexing against the railing. The taste of victory was thick in the air, copper and ozone, the scent of a forge after quenching steel. But beneath it, something else lingered. They had won. Not just survived, not just endured, won. Against a force that had shattered their fleets before. Against an enemy that had once made the Dralethian Empire kneel. And they had done it his way, the human way. A low chime sounded from the comms array. Vashdor's voice crackled through, his usual measured tone frayed at the edges. "Draleth, the Krixx remnants are broadcasting. It's a pause. You need to hear this." Draleth snarled, but he gestured for the feed to be patched through. The voice that filled the chamber was not Krixx, it was human. Major Maya Woods stood in the center of the Krixx command ship's ruined bridge, her boots planted on the cracked obsidian deck, her rifle slung across her back. The bodies of Krixx warriors lay around her, their carapaces split open by precise gunfire, their limbs twisted in unnatural angles. She was breathing hard, blood streaked her armor, some of it hers, but she was smiling. The broadcast flickered, the Krixx's own emergency transmitter's jury, rigged to carry her signal across the system. Her voice was calm, almost conversational, as if she were discussing the weather instead of standing in the heart of a dying warship. "Attention, Krixx High Command." She tilted her head, listening to something in her earpiece. Then she laughed, a sharp, bright sound utterly out of place in the carnage. "No, I don't think you understand. This isn't a negotiation." She stepped forward, her boot crushing a shattered console underfoot. The camera feed shuddered as something detonated deep in the ship's belly. "You came for our allies. You thought the Dralethians were weak, broken." Her smile vanished. "You were wrong." Behind her, Sergeant Felger emerged from the shadows, dragging a Krixx officer by the throat. The alien thrashed, its mandibles clicking in panic, but Felger's grip didn't waver. His face was a mask of blood and soot, his teeth bared in something too feral to be called a grin. Maya didn't even glance at him. "You want a message for your warlords?" She leaned closer to the camera, her eyes burning. "Tell them this, the Dralethians are under human protection now." Felger snapped the Krixx officer's neck. The feed cut to static. Draleth's claws had sunk deep into the railing, the metal groaning under his grip. His blood was fire in his veins, his pulse a drumbeat of something he couldn't name, something deeper. Vashdor's voice was hushed. They boarded the flagship alone. Draleth exhaled, slow and controlled. Of course they had. Humans didn't just fight wars, they made statements, and this one would echo across the stars. He turned to his crew, his voice a low growl. "Bring them home." Section Fae. Final push. The Indomitable burned through the void like a dying star, its hull bleeding atmosphere and glowing tendrils of orange and white. The Krixx flagship, Dominion's Will, loomed ahead, a jagged obsidian monolith wreathed in the sickly green pulse of its shields. Draleth watched the feed from the bridge of his own vessel, his claws flexing against the command console. The humans had done the impossible. They had boarded the Krixx command ship alone, and now they were trapped inside. Maya Woods moved through the corridors like a ghost. The Krixx vessel was a nightmare of organic metal, its walls pulsing with bioluminescent veins, its air thick with the stench of ammonia and scorched alloy. Every step sent fresh pain lancing up her leg. The wound from the boarding pod's impact hadn't fully sealed. She didn't care. Felger was ahead of her, his rifle sweeping the shadows. His armor was cracked. One pauldron sheared clean off, but his breathing was steady, controlled. They had one objective left. The bridge, a shape lunged from the darkness. A Krixx warrior, its chitinous limbs whirring with hydraulic precision. Felger didn't hesitate. His rifle barked once, twice, the rounds punching through the alien's thorax in bursts of blue ichor. Maya didn't slow. They had no time for clean kills. Draleth's ship shuddered as another volley of Krixx plasma fire raked across its shields. The Dominions had called for reinforcements. 3 more cruisers, their weapons locked onto the human vessel. Vashdor's voice crackled over the comms. Their shields are failing. Another hit and, I know. Draleth's mandibles tightened. He had watched the humans fight. He had seen the way they moved, like predators, like pack hunters. They didn't just attack, they cornered their prey, and now they were cornered. His claws dug deeper into the console, not while he still drew breath. The Krixx bridge was a cavern of writhing tendrils and flickering holograms, its crew scrambling as alarms shrieked. Maya stepped through the ruined doors, her pistol raised. The Krixx captain turned, a towering monstrosity of reinforced carapace and cybernetic augments. Its voice was a distorted snarl. "You dare." Felger shot it in the face. The alien's head snapped back, its skull rupturing in a spray of viscous fluid. Maya didn't flinch. She strode to the command console, her fingers flying across the alien interface. The Krixx encryption was brutal, layered, but human neural augments were better. A second later, the ship's system screamed in protest. The Dominions lurched, its engine stuttering. Felger grinned. That's one way to send a message. Maya didn't answer. She was already moving. Draleth saw it before the sensors registered it. The Krixx flagship's core, its massive plasma reactor, was destabilizing. A cold realization settled in his gut. The humans hadn't just boarded the ship. They had rigged it to blow. Vashdor's voice was sharp. They'll never make it off in time. Draleth didn't hesitate. Open a channel. Maya's calm crackled. A voice, deep, guttural, Dralethian. Human, you have 10 seconds. She didn't question it. Felger was already ahead of her, his boots pounding against the shuddering deck. The corridor behind them erupted in flames, the ship tearing itself apart. They reached the hangar as the world turned white. Draleth watched the Dominions die. The explosion ripped through the Krixx formation, its shockwaves scattering the reinforcements like embers in a storm. A single human dropship streaked free of the firestorm, its hull scorched, its engines sputtering. Vashdor exhaled. They made it. Draleth didn't answer. He didn't need to. The humans had done what his entire fleet could not. And now, the galaxy would remember. Section Fae. The debt repaid, the fires of the Dominions still burned in the void, casting flickering orange reflections across the scarred hulls of the Dralethian fleet. The molten remnants of the Krixx reinforcements drifted in broken, lifeless clusters, their once menacing formations reduced to cooling debris. Draleth stood motionless on the command deck, his armored fingers resting against the edge of the tactical display. The holographic projections flickered with damage reports, casualty counts. But his gaze was fixed on the single human dropship limping toward them, its thrusters spitting erratic bursts of plasma. Vashdor approached, his copper-plated cranial ridges twitching in agitation. They should be dead. Draleth exhaled, the sound a low, grinding rasp. They should, but they weren't. The humans had done the impossible. Again, the dropship docked with a shuddering clang, its airlock groaning under the strain of battle damage. The boarding corridor pressurized, and the first figure to emerge was Sergeant Felger. His armor blackened by soot, his left pauldron half melted from plasma burns. He moved with the stiff precision of a man who had long since learned to ignore pain. Behind him, Major Maya Woods stepped forward, her visor retracting to reveal a face streaked with grime and sweat. Her eyes, though exhausted, burned with the same relentless fire that had carried her through the heart of a dying warship. Draleth studied them. Humans were soft, fragile, their flesh tore easily, their bones shattered under pressure. And yet, they had walked through fire and come out the other side. Vashdor's voice crackled over the comm. Their ship's structural integrity is compromised. They won't survive another engagement. Draleth didn't respond immediately. His mind traced back through the years, the first time he had encountered humans, the way they had fought like cornered beasts, the way they had refused to die, and then, the memory that settled it. They protected our embassy, he said at last. Vashdor turned. What? Draleth's mandibles flexed. When the Krixx raided the neutral zone, the humans held the line. They did not have to. They were not bound by treaty. But they did, and now the debt would be repaid. The order went out in a single, unbroken transmission. All vessels formed defensive perimeter around the human ship. Across the fleet, Dralethian commanders hesitated, just for a moment, before obeying. Their warships shifted, their massive, angular hulls sliding into position, creating a wall of dark metal and molten energy between the humans and the remnants of the Krixx armada. Maya watched through the viewport as the alien fleet moved to shield them. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Felger let out a breath, half laugh, half disbelief. Well, guess we're not dying today. The battle was not over. The Krixx regrouped, their surviving ships rallying for one final assault. But something had changed. The Dralethians fought differently now. Their weapons fired with renewed precision. Their formations tightened, their movements synchronized, not just as warriors, but as something more. When the last Krixx cruiser detonated in a silent bloom of plasma, the void fell still. Draleth turned to the human ship on his display. Tell your people, he said, the words carrying the weight of centuries, that the Dralethian Compact remembers its debts. And for the first time in recorded history, a human and a Dralethian stood side by side, not as enemies, not as uneasy allies, but as something new, something the galaxy would learn to fear. Epilogue. 1 year later, the Krixx High Command received the transmission in the dead of night. It was not a declaration of war. It was not a demand for surrender. It was a single image, a human warship and a Dralethian dreadnought, flying in perfect formation, their weapons locked onto the same target, and beneath it, a message in both languages. The galaxy held its breath. And for the first time in centuries, the Krixx were afraid.